The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everybody, and welcome today to our final part of our 5-part foundation series of webinars, all about payroll and how we can transform payroll into a strategic operation. We're going to be talking today about the employee experience. Hopefully, you've joined us for the previous 4 shows, which have been talking about getting your foundations right, operational efficiency, pay propositions, HR data and insights, and today it's all about the employee experience. If you do want to find out what those last shows were all about, you can access them in audio only on the Payroll podcast. I believe on SD Worx you can find previous episodes as well. But today it's all about employee experience, and there is going to be a link in the chat which my colleagues are going to post in just a moment, which will give you access to a white paper that this show is going to follow along with as well. It gives you lots of data, lots of stats from a study that SD Worx have undertaken. So do check out that white paper as we go along if you can, or download it and read it later if you can't. Right, so today we're going to be talking about, the transformation of a payroll from department to strategic powerhouse, something we hear so much about in the payroll industry, something that payroll people are so keen to do. How do we move from ops to strategic? We'll be talking all about that. We're going to be talking about onboarding experiences and reshaping employee interactions. We're going to be talking about real-time earnings, a hot topic in the world of payroll at the moment. But we're also going to be talking about flexible pay propositions and financial well-being, and how do they all link together, the benefits of each and the responsibilities as well. And last but by no means least, we're going to be talking about the power of payroll data and analytics, plus how you can unlock the greatest ROI. That's return on investment. There will be an opportunity for you to ask questions as well. If you have anything that's really burning that you really want to ask our expert panel, put them in the chat box. We'll try and ask those as we go through as well. And there will be 2 polls today. We want to get your feelings and your views on a couple of things as we go through. So be prepared for that. One of them will be coming very, very soon. So this is a festive show, the last one we're doing before Christmas, the last of the series, and we're bringing you a fantastic panel of experts to take you through it. So we're going to be bringing you Bob, who is CEO of Cintric, a payroll and transformational professional who I've known for over 10 years. He's been in the industry for over 20. Bob, I wondered if you could introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, hi Nick, and thank you. I feel very inadequate not having the Christmas gear on today, so my apologies to everyone. So, but look, lovely to be here again. As you say, I've been done most of these with you, Nick. So it's a pleasure and great to be joining Kat. So yeah, I'm the founder and CEO of Cintric. We support organisations with HR, payroll, and finance transformation, always helping clients think about what they want to do and ultimately the best for their employee experience. So, looking forward to the conversation today, Nick.
Absolutely fantastic. And if you want to know about employee experience, there is no one better to have on today's panel than Kat Bernardes, who is Director of People Experience at Lace Partners. Kat, I wondered if you could please introduce yourself.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me here today, Nick, and it's great to be here with Bob. So yeah, Kat Bernardes at Lace. We do everything from HR and payroll transformation through to implementation. And I am very excited because people experience is a massive passion of mine. It's something I've been heavily involved in for a number of years now, and really part of what I've done with Lace is try to bring experience into absolutely everything that we do, even in payroll. So I am a newbie to payroll in that sense, but over the last few years I've been working with my payroll colleagues to think about how experience can be brought to life through payroll as well. So very excited to be here and looking forward to the discussion.
Fantastic. And we know, and we're going to discover today, that actually collaboration with HR, collaboration in relation to the employee experience is absolutely critical if you want to make payroll the strategic powerhouse that I believe most people watching this want it to be. For those who don't know me, I'm the host of the Payroll podcast. I'm the CEO of JGA Recruitment Group, and we're a specialist payroll and HR recruiter. And I'm also host of Payroll Question Time, which I deliver in accordance and in cooperation, shall I say, with SD Worx as well as these panels. So I've been in payroll for over 20 years, a bit like Bob. I've seen the industry change significantly, but never more so probably than the last 48 months that we've experienced. And we're going to find out exactly why during the course of this show, why it's shifted so fast, and how we can really get hold of that to make it the strategic place we want payroll to be. Before we jump into the content today, I'm going to ask all of you wonderful listeners to get involved. I'm going to wake you all up and get you into the festive spirit with this first question. How has the role of payroll evolved in your organization within the last 3 to 5 years? For those that perhaps are in audio only, there are 4 options here. Its role has got smaller, it's stayed the same, it's more prominent now, or it's a key strategic driver. While we're waiting for those results to come in, let's ask our panel what they think on this particular question. Let me start with you, Bob. How do you think the role of payroll has evolved in organizations in the last 3 to 5 years?
Well, I think it's definitely, it's not got smaller and it's not stayed the same. It's more prominent. And we've got to remember the times, COVID was a few years ago, right? But it still comes and haunts us every now and then. So, at that time, what did payroll have to do? It became prominent. Organizations were reliant on making sure people still continue to get paid, that we thought about all the changes in legislation that were being thrown at us every 5 or 10 minutes from the government. All of those things made payroll functions come to the fore of organizations actually, and make sure that employees were being looked after, being settled, dealing with their pay issues. We had the furlough schemes, we had all of those things coming to us. So definitely for me, the last 3 to 5 years have brought them to the fore. And actually now I think it helps them have a voice at the table. Don't know what Kat thinks as well.
Well, Kat, I'd be interested from your perspective, because payroll, you said, has just started to come into your world of work, right? Perhaps it wasn't there 5 years ago. Is that a sign that it's changed?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that payroll is actually, at the forefront of some of the things that new technology and new innovation is doing as well. So, robotics, process automation, AI, like there's a lot of organizations really starting to think about how they can use some of these in the payroll space to offer different offerings beyond the traditional just pay people right at the right time. There's some really interesting stuff that we can certainly explore throughout this conversation. And I think that's where the link back to the employee experience and it being a key driver of your employee value proposition means that it's, it becomes more strategic in nature.
I couldn't agree more. And employee value propositions is something that a lot of companies are talking about now in my world of recruitment, because without a strong EVP, you can't get the best talent on board, and it's really hard to onboard them and keep them and retain them. So it's really, really important. And payroll has an important role to play in those EVPs. I know we're going to ask you more questions about that later on in the show to find out how. But let's have a look at some of the results then, if they've come through. What do the audience think? Hopefully they're probably in line with yourself, Bob, would be my feel. But for those in audio only, the answers are the role has got smaller as 8%. It stayed the same, 38%. Equally, it's more prominent, 38%, and it's now a key strategic driver, 15%. Interesting results. Bob, what are your thoughts on those?
Well, I'm very interested where it's got smaller because, obviously, looking at technology and the way the world has moved, obviously payroll is becoming easier to run potentially, and therefore organizations are reducing size. But it's more prominent, makes sense, right? Good to see that there is organizations with strategic drivers. As Kat says, it's now becoming part of, how the employer's value proposition is, and how organizations are making sure that it fits that whole EVP. So a mixed bag, but good to see there's a lot more prominent and key strategic drivers in there as well.
It seems to me this could be the perfect time for today's webinar, because we're going to really drive those 38% to think it stayed the same, hopefully, and move them into the moving on the other side of that bell curve. What do you think, Kat, on those results?
Yeah, no, I agree. I was about to say the same. I think we've got an opportunity to change some minds and hopefully give you some ammunition to go back to your businesses and prove that payroll really does have an important part to play in the sort of strategic priorities of the business. So we'll do our best as we go through.
So let's get into that then. Let's talk about how we can transform the role of payroll today, because I know, and I've seen it happen in the last 20 years that I've been in the industry, it's definitely moved from its back office, no window function that it used to be, into a much more strategic influencing department that actually has a massive impact now on employee engagement. And I don't think I'd have put the words employee engagement next to the word payroll 10 years ago. And that's something that I've seen in the world of recruitment and payroll recruitment shift. But what are the key factors then that are really influencing that shift? Maybe I'll start with you, Bob.
Well, I think we always underestimate the data that the payroll function has to its hand, and the insight that it can have. And traditionally, if you go back 5 or 10 years, payroll functions have been a transactional center, right? I've been given a gross amount, I've got to deduct some taxes, I've got to pay some NIs, and then I've got to look at the benefits and transact to make sure their pay slip goes well. And I think those forward-thinking organizations are now thinking, well, actually, there's a load of insight, everything from what are the salary bands out there, and what else are competitors doing in the market? How do I use the data? How do I get sentiments? How many queries am I getting from my employees about my pay? How can I build on the sentiments that I'm hearing and the queries they're handling and relay that back, and getting employees, or employers to think about the engagement with their employers? Someone's struggling with some money, they've had some tax deducted, let's do that. I mean, there was a very small company recently that made sure that every query that came into payroll, a HR person would also speak to that person and say, is there a wider problem? So there's so much data, so much information that sits with payroll functions that they're now trying to say, how do we use that? And then as we start to think about the AI capabilities coming in the future, how do we start to really leverage that data? So I think moving away from being a transactional function to something that can provide insight and education into the organization and start to employ is really the direction I'm seeing here, Nick.
I'm going to come to Kat in a moment about the data piece, because she's a bit of an expert here. So just hold that thought. But Bob, what I've got you for a moment, because obviously you at Cintric, you're a founder of a business that's very heavily involved in transformations for companies. So if we keep that an eye on how it's changed, how's it changed transformationally? So what are the kind of transformations perhaps you were dealing with 10 years ago, and how's that shifted to the kind of transformations you're involved with now?
Well, I think organizations are thinking of transformations as a whole, right? Whereas sometimes it used to be thought about how is it a cost reduction exercise, or how is it about efficiencies? But actually now it's all about how do we make our employee proposition better? How do we make sure that we're doing those? So the shift of people's mindset when they're thinking about transformations is definitely more outward thinking to both customers, but actually their internal customers, their employees. So I think that's been a great move on transformation journeys. Whereas before, like I said, it was all cost reduction. How do I become more operationally efficient? How do I reduce the cost of my payroll or HR functions? It's now about, employees. So that's a great move. But also the technology that's available out there, right? I mean, the boundaries between HR, payroll, and finance are closing, right? They really are starting to become something that are so merged together. So transformations have to think about functional activities and really going across the employee experience. So I think there's just a mind shift change in transformations being about increasing propositions for our employees and customers, as opposed to there being a cost reduction exercise. So that's been a massive shift, Nick.
Love that. I want to come to Kat then, because you mentioned two words there, which is people experience. Again, words I don't think we'd have associated with payroll 10 years ago. We certainly are now. Now, Kat is someone who helps specialize in supporting organizations with their experience ambition. And I know you do a lot of that innovative work with leveraging data to gather insights, to find personas. I'd love to know from your side of things that, when it comes to payroll personas, how do you think data's really, what impact has data had, I guess, on it becoming more strategic and collaborative?
Yeah. I think the personas are the key for me. I think really understanding the different segments of your workforce and understanding what their motivations, needs are, from a sort of a basic perspective. I need to get paid in this time frame, and what my expectations are around that, but also what their behaviors are. That might be more around their own financial behavior, right? How financially savvy they are as individuals, and what support they therefore need from you as an organization and from the payroll function to support them in thinking about how they manage their finances more effectively, for example. So I think there is a real need to understand your different personas and how people want to interact. And as Bob said earlier, COVID and the economic climate at the moment means that different people are ideally wanting to be paid in different ways and have more flexibility. So thinking about what that means for those different personas is really important. And we would always take a data-led approach to that, taking data from your existing employee base and your payroll systems that you have today, but also going out and getting the voice of the customer and hearing directly from them about what their needs are and what's important to them.
So if we're in agreement then that payroll and HR transformations are now really starting to reshape the employee experience, and payroll has a really heavy involvement in that. Now, both of you nodding, which is great, so I'm on the right path. And we're moving away from the traditional inverted commas kind of payroll functions. Bob, I wondered if you could share some examples of how payroll transformations that you've been working with have positively impacted that employee engagement piece.
Yeah, so I think another great example, actually, now that you're talking about it, there's an organization, there are only about 1,000 employees globally, but for every employee coming on, yes, you've got the onboarding experience, but actually payroll function makes it a process to talk to the employee to make sure that everything is right. So not only is the onboarding experience like the typical HR, I've got your details, I've got your onboarding experience, I've got your learning, your education, but they've made it a play that a payroll person would call that person and say, look, I think we've got everything we need, and we just want to check it with you. And actually that subtle intervention for 5 minutes, on an onboarding experience where you're talking to payroll, just giving that employee that saying, well, it matters, right? How I'm getting paid and when I get paid and is it all correct has mattered. And they've just seen an increase in their employee experience, right? So these are the little snippets that organizations are saying, let's move away from that transactional activity and become that frontward facing employee experience and engagement. So those are little subtle changes that we can all do, right? All payroll functions can do. Yes, we're on tight timelines, right? And I hear it all the time. My weekly pay, my fortnightly pay, my monthly pay, I'm in a tight timeline. But actually, if we can find those 5 or 10 minutes just to talk to a new employee and make sure we onboard them correctly, there's such a massive difference in the employee experience. So that's just one way I've seen employee functions payroll function becoming more engaging with employees up front.
I think it's a fantastic example. I wrote an article about 2 years ago now about the forgotten aspect of recruitment, right? So my involvement when it comes to payroll recruitment is finding talent, placing with an organization. And people think then, and we have rebate periods and guarantees, things like that, but the onboarding experience is often the bit that's most neglected. Companies think the job is done when the person's in the door. But actually, that new employee is in a new space. They don't know how they feel. They're working out the culture, the values, the feel. And actually, the biggest opportunity or biggest likelihood of them leaving is going to be in that first 3 months because they either don't feel included or belong or part of it, or they do. And I think that's often really neglected. And I love in your profile, Kat, on LinkedIn, you talk about the experience ambition. And ambition would suggest to me that it goes beyond that induction period, right? And how we can get involved in that. So in what ways are payroll and HR collaborating in the work that you're doing to make that employee experience in relation to payroll more innovative and more strategic and sort of pushing that to the fore?
So I think onboarding is a great example, which is the starting point, right? That's the first experience engagement somebody has, and you have to nail that. And therefore, thinking even beyond just payroll and HR and cross collaboration across all the different functions that have some form of input in onboarding is super important. And organizations that are doing it really well are putting together those sort of cross-functional squads to think about how do we create a seamless experience across all those touch points, not just the payroll element, not just the HR element, not just the security or facilities element. And that's one of those things across the entire life cycle where payroll and HR can come together. The other bit is around kind of time and attendance and how that links in then to getting your pay on time. And a lot of that comes down to behaviour and mindset of both the employee and of the line manager. So sometimes where, my pay is not correct, my overtime wasn't approved on time, all those sorts of things are actually down to that relationship with the line manager and the line manager understanding the importance of their role in getting it right. So there, across the entire life cycle, there are these little touch points when someone exits the business, for example, making sure that final payment is correct and is aligned with all the things that they're owed. So there's loads of these touch points, and thinking about the experiences end to end is really where we're seeing our clients come together with across HR and payroll, and as I said, other functions sometimes as well.
Yeah, I love that. And what I like as well is, we're talking about today how we can make payroll more strategic. Well, this kind of ties in with strategic workforce planning, right? It comes into that piece, and payroll has a part to play now because it needs to collaborate with HR. If we want to have a more effective workforce planning process, we need a better alignment of our costs, our objectives, our budgeting, our compensation and benefits, and all the other things that go with it. So if we know that, and payroll can play a part in that strategic process, which I think is really, really exciting, and they can help create that positive first impression through streamlined onboarding processes, how can we really utilize our systems and our data and things like that to integrate and simplify an onboarding process for new hires? So I'll come to you with that one, Kat.
So I think, as I said, it's about those touch points and being really clear about what system is enabling what at what point in time, so that from a candidate perspective, they don't really notice the difference. They just know that they are going through a series of things that's going to get them ready to come and join the organisation, that you're getting their bank details, that you're getting the information that you need in order to be able to welcome them in a really warm way. And so where you can be really clear on the touch points with the payroll systems and the HR system, and ideally integrate them. And some organisations are putting candidate experience layers over the top that hide some of that. And those are some of the things that people are investing in, because ultimately it does create that better experience for a candidate. And then adding in the human touch, like the example that Bob gave earlier, is also important. For me, it's really important to think about experience in terms of the digital, the physical, and the human interactions that people have, and not just necessarily about the technology, although that's a massive key enabler, absolutely.
Sure. So I see you nodding away there, Bob. So from your perspective, what role does payroll play in shaping an employee's initial perspective or perception of an organisation? And what can payroll systems do to optimise that?
Yeah, and listen, we've got to always come back to the fundamental. Why do people go to work? Right? Everyone goes to work so they can get paid to make a living, right? And listen, at the end of the day, that's why we all work, right? And so we've got to make sure that that becomes the number one priority that we as an organization, when we've got employees, think about, right? The employees here because they want to, yes, they want to enhance their career, but ultimately they're here for a monthly pay packet, a weekly pay packet, whatever it might be. So, payroll functions have to think that that's their important role. They are here to make sure they retain talent, engage talent, and they've got a massive part to play in that talent, that war for talent we keep talking about, right? We keep talking about the skills gap, the war for talent, and all of those things keep coming up every week. So payroll has a massive role to play in making sure that we continue to have the right people. And I talked a little bit about how payroll did that pre-call, but actually there's an organization that actually on the first month's pay, as you say, Kat, it's really important to get paid correctly, sends out a text message, just a bit like you get a survey from someone. They send out a text message to all new employees at that payday, say, you should have got paid today. Can you confirm you got paid correctly or not? And that subtle text, which is automated, comes back and they get about a 90% response rate. So not everyone responds, but it shows to the employee that they care. Rather than me being reactive, I'm caring and want to know that I've been paid correctly. So these are all subtle things that payroll functions are now doing. So don't underestimate how far now payroll can go with benefits. I mean, there's this new thing out there now with, salary sacrifices we've known in pensions is a massive area. We're now talking about salary sacrifices in groceries, right? There are these schemes out there now that are wider, but they're all they've got to be done and worked in association with payroll. So these little schemes that all help with employees' experience, benefits, the economic climate, payroll should be coming up and saying, look, why aren't we thinking about some of these things as well? So
yeah,
I'm passionate about the role they play, right?
There's a bigger role there as well strategically, right? So if we bring in one of those examples you gave, we say sometimes these little things, these marginal gains can make a difference, but payroll have an opportunity to leverage data to say, okay, we've introduced this. Since we introduced it, has our retention improved? Now, how's that impacted on our absence? How's that impacted on different areas? And then suddenly we're thinking about it as a strategic enterprise. We talked about strategic workforce planning on the onboarding piece. We talked a little bit about data, and I'm going to get into that a little bit more, and we're going to utilize some of Kat's expertise in that area as well. But something we're also hearing in terms of new things being offered now, there's a lot of talk about real-time play, earned wage access, pay on demand, whatever you want to term it. A lot of people interested in whether this is the right thing for their business, whether it isn't the right thing for their business, flexible pay for employees. Ultimately, what we do know is whether the payrolls like it or whether they don't, it's something employees are often demanding, and we kind of, if that's what employees want, they're going to potentially choose their employers the next employer based on the services they can provide. And this is again where payroll can be more strategic. So if we know that real-time earnings are empowering employees because it gives them better visibility into their earnings, quicker access to pay, and we know that flexible pay gives them more control over their finances, what are some of the challenges of implementing things like real-time earnings visibility for employees? Because I think that's been one of the barriers to entry for a lot of payroll professionals. I saw a CRPP study where people said, well, I haven't got the time to implement, it's too complex, how does it even work? Bob, let me come to you.
Yeah, listen, these are all new initiatives, and I think there are both pros and cons to these new ways of paying people, right? Pay on demand, as you say, and pay flexibility. So I think the technologies now are having to play a massive part in this, and those that it's a bit like the Blockbuster story, right? If these software companies and payroll vendors are not going to come to the table and bring that ability and that agility to payroll for professionals to run these sort of processes, they're going to fall behind. So the software vendors have got a huge part to play, and supporting the ability to have flexible pay on demand, etc. So, but also there is a massive responsibility on employers, right? Because the amount of mental activity that this creates an employee that might be living day to day on their pay is also a very important part. So the technology has got a massive part to play, employers have got a massive part to play, but we have to move with the times. It's here, it's not going anywhere. And the call out is to the software vendors and payroll vendors to come to the table and help make this reasonable and easy to enact on.
And from an HR perspective, Kat, how do these flexible pay models and real-time pay solutions impact the changing financial needs of a modern workforce?
I mean, I think this is a prime example of where you need to think of it through the lens of your personas, because it's not important for everybody. But there are definitely workforces and the gig economy and people that are getting paid maybe a little in sort of retail space more on a sort of hourly basis, for example, where it is more important for them to have that flexibility. It's not as important though for other people that are maybe salaried workers in other industries. So I think understanding really where the right investment is in this is important, because as Bob said, it is relatively new. Some organisations are doing it and doing it really well, but I think there's an opportunity to identify and test in smaller pockets of populations first to make sure that it's getting the return in terms of the experience and the benefits to the business as well. But there's loads of organisations that are testing and trialing this. A lot of the retailers in the US are trialing it. Target, for example, have implemented an earned wage access program. That Kroger have got a debit card sort of option that allows people to draw pay for things based on their real-time earnings. So there's some really interesting use cases out there that people can learn from. But it's just thinking about really where does it have the most impact for different workers in your populations.
So we're in agreement then that potentially these kind of options can support employees' financial well-being, which is great. We know that they're there initially. I think we brought it initially. I did a podcast with Peter Biffett at WageStream probably 3 years ago, which was very much the focus then was about preventing the over-reliance on payday loans. I think there's been a lot of legislation that's improved the payday loan experience, but even so, we don't want people relying on those things. However, there's still a lot of questions out there about whether, because some solutions charge the employee, it might be minimal, but they charge the employee for access to that. There's a whole piece out there that I think that's personal perspective. I think that should be funded by the employer, but that's definitely a personal perspective. But there are lots of other considerations around this. I wondered if Bob, I'll start with you, Bob, about what those considerations might be and what do we need to consider?
Look, ultimately, as employers, we have to make sure that we're looking after the employee welfare here, right? And the move away from payday loans was important because people were getting stuck in a circle of high interest rates, paying over the moon, and not actually getting into a cycle that actually they couldn't get out of. And employers found that actually that had an effect on their mental state and their ability to work and therefore the work that they were doing for the company. So the first thing that's really important is that employers take social responsibility for the well-being of their employees, especially around pay. And so that's, for me, has been the number one importance. The organizations that have come out with the flexible pay, the sort of pay on demand options, the card options are great because they've said, actually, we recognize that these are issues. We want to give them a better way. We can't take it away because they have a reliance on it, but we want to find a middle ground. So I think there's been some great moves about helping people earn their income as they go through a month. And for some people that are organized. But I think who pays for it? Listen, if it's a service and it's something that's in there, someone's got to foot the bill for this, right? And I talk on behalf of employers. Employers might say, well, actually, it's just part of the benefits. We'll give them for free. We'll make sure they get the cash when they want to. Some organizations aren't in that same position where actually it's just another cost now. And do I need to take the cost? But organizations that are winning are saying, well, it's the cost that we pay and we'll take for the benefit of our employee experience, which is in turn, is the experience that our employees have, their longer term, the skills stay, and we got happier workforces. So fine balance, and each company has to make their own decision on this.
There is. I think one thing that's really important from my perspective, what I'm hearing in the market as well, is the financial education piece around this, right? Because there's different solutions as well. Some solutions allow you to draw down 100% of your pay. Some solutions allow you to limit it. Kat, in your experience, how can we make this work? Because I think without the financial education, this could really be we could actually be exacerbating the problem. So
yeah,
what's your take?
Yeah, I think you have to offer both things, right? You offer the flexibility, but at the same time, the education and support to make sure that the people understand what they're doing. If they draw down all of their money in one go, what does that mean for them? And so there are organisations that are doing things like helping with financial budgeting, programs that are designed specifically around that. There may need to be some governance around it. So as an individual, when you take the option to take flexible pay, for example, is there a conversation with your line manager to say, do you feel supported enough to do that? Do you understand the implications that might have? So there may be a role there to play sort of on that side of it as well. And I think there are other ways in which we can think about flexible pay around not necessarily being on a weekly, monthly basis, but maybe you focus it more on a life event. For example, someone's moving house, and actually how can you help them during that time with some financial support, because it's a big moment, a big cost outlay. Is there a way that you can give people more flexibility during that period, but it's a more shorter confined time, so that from an ongoing sort of financial well-being perspective, it's supporting but not overburdening people with thinking about how they manage this on a long-term basis. So I think there's got to be that thought from organisations around how they provide support around the wellbeing aspects, as well as just the infrastructure and the process to enable them to do it.
I totally agree. I mean, according to Reward Strategy, over 4 million UK workers already have control over their pay with earned wage access solutions. So a lot of people have access to this already. But it's an interesting time we're doing this webinar, right? We're going into the period of a festive period. A lot of people are spending money on Christmas gifts, but actually Christmas comes before payday for many people. And there is that real financial struggle where they might be at a time now where they are taking credit because they want to afford Christmas, or if they have access to pay, to an earned wage access solution, or maybe they draw down too soon and then can't afford the bills at the end of the month. I think there's two sides to this. It's a really interesting time, I think, to be having the conversation as well right now, because of some of those things that we need to consider. What I do know is payments.com did a study of entrepreneur CEOs and C-suites about whether they thought this was something that was going to bring in, and 61% said that real-time payments will provide them with a competitive advantage, including a strong inclination towards adopting such systems. So we know that businesses are thinking about this. 61% is a lot more than it was even a year ago we were talking about at that moment in time. So we kind of feel like it's coming, but in what guise is what is still to be determined. I do know, and people may have heard this before from a recruitment perspective, I once dealt with a candidate who had an interview, couldn't afford to go to the interview because she was waiting for payday, and living paycheck by paycheck in that regard was difficult, because I want to go, I can't afford the train fare to go, I can't do the interview, but she'd already earned the money because she'd left the previous employment but had to wait 7 months to get it. So I can see both sides. Sometimes it can be really critical, sometimes it can it can say the other side. But let's go to our audience and see what they think about this, because I think this is a topic that's going to continue to pop up. A lot of people are considering it, and absolutely, for the right business and for the right persona, as Kat mentioned, it can be a fantastic solution for employees, and a fantastic offering to improve the employee engagement experience. The question for our next poll then is, how important do you think real-time visibility into earnings is for employee engagement? Now, for those in audio only, the options are extremely important, very important, somewhat important, not very important, or not important at all. So how important do you think real-time visibility into earnings is for employee engagement? Now, being an employee engagement expert as you are, Kat, let me ask you this question while we're here, while waiting for these poll results to come in. If you were polling and answering this question, what would you say?
I would say somewhat important, because I think it is going to be for specific industries and specific workforce segments that's going to be more important, I think.
Yeah, and Bob? Yeah, I'm the same with Kat. I think it depends on the industry that you're in, right? So for retail industry and manufacturing, maybe it's quite important now and what have you. But for those maybe that in professional services and other industries, I think it may not be seen as that important from an employee engagement. I think what you've got to just say is that we've got to be enabled as an organisation to deal with a certain employee type or persona, as we refer to them, to be able to do this if needed. But yeah, it depends on the industry you're coming from.
Couldn't agree more. And certainly we've seen a lot of adoption in the world of hospitality and retail, as you mentioned. Yeah. And for the gig economy, you can see why this would really would be, be an important solution for the companies that are recruiting those kind of individuals. Definitely. Well, let's see what our audience think on this poll result. So we've got, just to read out for those in audio only, not important at all, 0%. That actually surprises me, but that shows how far we've moved on, I think. Not very important, 56%. Somewhat important, 44%. And again, extremely important, 0%. And not too dissimilar to our earlier poll, I have to say. Pretty much split down the middle. Let's have a little bit of commentary on these results. Let me start with you, Bob.
Well, I'm not surprised with this result, actually, because I think depending on the industry you're polling on, if you're in the professional services or in an industry where your monthly pay and it's professional, it's not very important, right? And that's the answer. Yeah. But if you're in the industry, as you say, retail, care industry, hospitals, whatever it might be, it's somewhat important. So I think I'm not surprised it's sitting in one of those two brackets, but it just shows that it reflects on the industry that the responses have come from.
I think that echoes what you were saying, Kat. It kind of depends on the persona, right? Anything you'd like to add to that?
No, I mean, I'm not really surprised by it. I think, as Bob's just alluded to, it's what I would expect. I'm surprised. I guess I'm surprised that nobody's put not important at all, because I suspect there are potentially some organisations where they don't think it is, but hopefully everyone's voting with an honest personal opinion here.
Well, I think something I'll take away from this is, don't always read too much into the headline news. We've had, how robots are coming and they would no longer need payroll anymore years ago. The BBC studied that, in conjunction with Deloitte many moons ago. And that hasn't happened. I remember seeing a headline about 2 years ago was saying, the dissolution of the monthly pay cycle is going to happen in the next 2 years. Well, that hasn't happened either. As you say, it comes down to what's going to work best for the organisation, the personas of the organisation as well. And it can work for some and not for others. So really interesting results so far. Well, let's talk a little bit more then about how, because a lot of this involves collaboration, because we know that payroll are involved in the paying of real-time pay, but often the idea of whether we bring it in or not will sit with HR. And I think there's a collaborative approach to this. And therefore, I think that payroll and HR have a combined financial well-being responsibility, if you like. So we talked a little bit about corporate responsibility and governance, and actually payroll needs to work with HR and their CSR strategies and things like that to make sure that it all works and it works for the business. So with that in mind, what kind of tools and resources can payroll teams utilize, access, get in order to support the employee financial literacy piece? We talked about how financial education being really important. If I talk about the payroll tools and come to you first with that, Bob, where can they go to help their employees and help them help them understand?
Well, I think an interesting question, and actually let me just come back a little bit on what you were saying, Nick. I still think, yes, we've got HR and we've got payroll. I think finance plays a massive part in payroll at the moment. So there is still loads of organizations out there that have payroll sitting under finance. And it's an interesting one because I see now a lot more organizations moving payroll into HR because of the employee proposition, but actually don't underestimate how much, how many organizations still treat payroll as a transactional and a finance transactional. But those that are moving, right? And we're talking about how payroll can play a more active part in supporting that employee experience and providing insight. I mean, the data, we talked about it's the end data, right? They've got the data available, they've got the demographic information available, they've got, the payments that they're making. And I know they've got some sensitive data as well that payroll have, so about people which don't necessarily want to share, but they can start to generate insight on the types of personas that we've got and what they're feeling and how they're earning and all of that information. So ultimately, we all come to work for our net pay. Is net pay, coming out correctly for those sort of categories of people, those job categories, etc. So, and then the data that's available on the web now, right? And as AI comes in, I talk about how summarizing pay and net pay. We do spend a lot of time thinking about gross pay, right? And how much is my salary? But when we look at net pay, taxes, NIs, but actually some people have got loans to pay off and debts to pay off and other things. Ultimately, what people take home is how they feel, right? I don't worry about I earn £10,000, but if I only take home £1,000 of that, what's my problem? And how am I then making my employers aware of that? Actually, Bob's got a different challenge, right? He might be benchmarked at the salary of everyone, but he's still not taking home enough to live on. So there's other insight that payroll have on net pay that I don't think is actually used to the benefit of an organization on their employee experience. So I think I would encourage lots more to start thinking about actually what's my take-home pay, yeah, and not just benchmarking bandings at salary and benchmark level.
Yeah,
so a lot of insight information that you can leverage. Yeah,
I think it's a salient point as well to talk about the financial piece and how it links to finance. I was guilty of that. I tend to think about it now in employee experience terms with HR, but you're absolutely right. Still, 40% or more of payroll departments still sit under finance. So I think that's a really interesting point that you make. How about come to you then, Kat? So I know that you mentioned the word data there as well, Bob. We're going to dive into data in just a moment for those that are keen to understand how we can leverage that and use the analytics in more smart and intelligent ways. But what other things should businesses be considering in relation to the resources that may be available to them to support employee financial literacy?
Yeah, so as Bob was just talking, what I was actually thinking about is actually the role of the HR team themselves and how that needs to evolve to being more proactive. So actually looking at the data, to Bob's point, and maybe identifying where people have got a massive variance between gross and net, and almost identifying pockets then where they might need to proactively reach out to them and say, can we provide you any support, etc., because it implies that maybe they've got challenges. And then the actual payroll team becoming more of that financial advisory type role than necessarily just the transactional get paid component of it. So I was, it's interesting for me. I was just thinking about how do you shift the roles within the payroll team to actually do some of that support and provide some of that financial well-being, and they become the resources to the employees. They are the touch point for them. So I don't know, Bob, if you have anything to add to that, but it was just as you were talking, it made me think.
Yeah, it is an interesting one. I mean, there are payroll companies. So money coaching, for example, is now becoming massive, right, in the industry. The amount of money coach organizations that are now being given as benefits in organizations to their employees is becoming huge, right? And ultimately, why is that? Because we want to help with the financial well-being. And I do think everyone from HR, finance, and payroll, whoever has employee touch points, needs to have some sort of financial training, right? Let's move away from, again, I hear it all the time when I'm talking to people. Let's move away from, well, the salary's benchmarked at that. That's great. But actually, do you understand what the underlying issues are for that individual employee that, may have sickness, may have loans, may have debts, and therefore their take-home payment is a lot lower than their peer on that same benchmark? Actually, what conversations are you having around the employee well-being and data on that? And HR typically don't see that data because they see the gross salary and they see the benchmark, but payroll has it. So how do we start to feed that back into HR and say, you know what, guys, you might want to have a look at these couple of people here, because whilst they're benchmarked, they've got some financial challenges, maybe a little subtle conversation. So let's get that financial education in.
I know here at JJ Recruitment, we offer IFA support as one of our benefits to our staff. And I think something that people forget, and certainly when they look at it, see someone, whatever salary it is, you mentioned, 10,000 or whatever, a month, or I think, they earn so much, it's so easy for them. But we forget that people live within their means. So when an interest rate changes or the cost of living goes up like it does, you've committed to loans, to cars, to houses, to whatever else. And they could be long-term things, and actually only a slight change in interest rate or cost of living really then puts a huge amount of financial stress on households. And that's, as you say, irrespective of the benchmarking piece. It's just the financial wellness and understanding of what we're committing to when we sign up to these things. If something was to shift, how does that stress our family? How does that impact our mental health? Because we know there's a really close link between financial stress and mental well-being. So I think you're absolutely right to mention those points. I think it's a really important financial education and understanding these things. And I think payroll can play a part in that as well, for sure, collaboratively with both finance and with HR, of course. Well, look, I know data is something we have to get into today, because this has been a real, I guess, the driving force for me in terms of what I've seen and how payroll's gone from that back office function into its strategic powerhouse that we want it to become and what it is slowly becoming, which I think is great. But how can we use data to really develop personalized payroll propositions that really impact employee experience? Maybe I'll have to come to you with that one first, Kat, because this is your world of expertise. So what can we do?
I mean, I think we've touched on quite a lot of it already, actually, around, really using some of the data that's at hand to understand the behaviours of your people and understanding, what mix do we have of who's getting paid hourly, weekly, monthly, etc. Like just using the basic payroll data that we have at our fingertips. but then actually exploring how many times do we get people come and raise tickets or raise questions with the payroll advisory team, for example. All of those are important touch points for us to understand where are some of the challenges that are happening in the payroll experience at all of those different parts of the life cycle, as I talked about earlier, and where are there opportunities to drive insight, aligning that to some key KPIs, as you mentioned earlier, Nick, around, you know, the impact that it has on retention, the impact it has on engagement, the impact that it might have on even productivity. If you're spending hours of your day going around trying to figure out a payroll problem, you're not doing your job. So, you know, it impacts productivity, and for businesses, that's the bottom line. So I think there's a lot of data that you can use to understand where there's the root cause of some problems to make better experience, and then actually understanding the individual and understanding how that data can pinpoint what needs to be personalized in those experiences. I read an interesting article the other day about Facebook, who are using AI to report on emotional intelligence through their interactions with payroll and HR. So they're looking at like what their emotions are and then providing a personalized response based on their emotional state, which I think is fascinating, really. If you think about, you know, I might be trying to do something and actually I am getting distressed or upset about the situation because maybe I haven't been paid on time and it impacts something that I'm trying to do. So how do we then personalize that response? And that's using AI, but you can do it with people as well. Like humans can provide that personalized experience. So those are just some of the things I think that you have to think about, and mapping out all of those critical touch points in the data and looking at them to drive insight is really important, and not just looking at them independently of one another.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. There's a almost an oxymoron in there somewhere about using AI to become more personalized, but of course it allows us to do more, doesn't it? It allows us to make, I mean, Bob gave a great example of where we can use AI and automation through the WhatsApp messaging of, you know, are you happy with your pay this month? How do you feel? It is more personalized because we didn't get that before. We, you know, individually, we know that would take hours for someone to individually put every number in, and why not use automation to do that? So from your perspective, Bob, and in some of the transformations you're seeing in the world of payroll, where does this all link together to make it more personalized? How do we get that human touch back in, but still leverage the power of data, the power of AI and automation, but still keep that human-centric approach?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. There is a term out there called humanizing AI, right? It's becoming quite, you know, quite the sort of the brand to call about there. So we absolutely have to do that. We're just going back very quickly on the data we get, right? And you know, we know that payroll see data like, you know, student loans and car loans, and actually they get the tax codes, right? Tax codes mean something, right, in the world of payroll, right? You know, and a HR person doesn't necessarily a tax code, but if my tax code means that I'm paying more taxes and RNI, I've got data there that says I've got a group of people with certain tax codes because they might have had a previous tax problem or something. So there's a lot of data in the payroll industry that people don't look at in a way that just is non-transactional. And I just want people to start looking at that. Look at how many people have got student loans, how many people have got court judgments, how many people have got travel loans. Now you've got to keep it, you know, it's personal data, but actually if payroll can start to analyze that information and even think about, you know, we know it's a fact that ethnic minorities tend to have bigger needs for money because they're supporting bigger families sometimes. You know, it's things like that you can get insight from. So if we've got access to this data, and we can try and find a way of leveraging AI on that data, obviously within confidence, we can humanize some of the interactions and say, well, look, I know about you a bit more than you think. Without going into the personal details, let me be more careful. So that's how we've got to use this data to bring out actions that employers can start to use, and actually probably haven't even thought about previously, saying, how do I start to use this payroll data that actually does mean something in a different way, rather than it just being a transactional code means I've got to tax someone a bit more and take some more out of their pay packet, right? You know, how do we use that to say, let me understand my employee base a bit more? So Nick, the world of AI, the world of data and access to data, obviously I'm not worried about ChatGPT, which just looks at the web. I'm talking about internal data.
Sure.
You know, it is definitely coming, and it's one of the biggest. I was at some event in Barcelona recently with one of the world's biggest HR systems, right? The whole expo was on AI. So it's coming. How do we leverage your internal data? So, you know, the world is opening up, but humanizing it is really important, Nick.
Yeah. And the key word there is in how can we leverage it, right? Because if we want to make it more strategic, this is where payroll can really become more strategic, not just with HR, but with finance as well. They can look at trends, and we know that if we utilize data, we've already discussed today about how it can influence more strategic workforce planning, strategic budgeting, aligning payroll more closely with company strategic objectives. So if we think about finance, they can look at year-on-year payroll expenses, for example, and how they're impacting. We can look at headcount trend analysis and how that links with HR, absence, of course, overtime, department. There's so many things, gender pay gap as well being another element. So there's so many ways we can utilize payroll data now to make it more strategic, but also to make it almost like a profit center, its own business unit. If we identify these things and spot anomalies which can save our company money, and you're a 10,000 employee business, one small anomaly times by 10 can have huge ramifications for the profitability and the success of that organization. What are some of the trends from your side, Kat, that perhaps payroll people could start to think about, maybe they haven't ever thought about before, that influence that employee experience?
What they've not thought about before, maybe. I can't think of anything off the top of my head that is any different to what we've already talked about. I think we've talked
about quite a few, to be fair, so that's okay.
To be honest.
Actually, I probably shouldn't have thrown a question at you because I'm conscious of time, and we still want to get through how we actually invest in payroll systems and make it really. So it's a subject that I'm passionate about because this really involves talent, attraction, and retention. So let me come to you with this instead. The benefits we know from investing in payroll systems, hopefully we've shown. We know if we have the right systems, we can create more creative propositions for our employees. It should impact positively on our ability to attract top talent, retain top talent, providing our onboarding experiences are good and everything else. But we talked right at the start, or you talked right at the start, Kat, about EVP. So how does enhancing payroll systems contribute to an organization's ability to attract and retain talent from an employer value proposition, EVP perspective?
That's a really good question. So I think what's really interesting is that nowadays, and a lot of it's been brought on by the pandemic and the current economic climate, employers are looking for very different things now in their employee value proposition. The standard stuff that people put out there as part of their proposition before isn't enough. It's expected as very standard now. So thinking about things like purpose, flexibility, career opportunities, they're the key things now that employees really want to understand. And I think payroll has that flexibility part of it. I think payroll has a big part to play in that. And thinking about some of the propositions that you put forward, like some of the stuff we've talked about earlier today, really articulating those and the benefits that brings to the candidate. But then the key is to actually deliver it in reality when they join the organisation, because if you set out an employee value proposition that you can't actually fulfil, that's when you get problems, and that's when people leave in the first year, because they come in with the expectations. I use this analogy all the time of a holiday in Barbados and they get a trip to Bognor. So you have to really kind of make sure that what you are doing is achievable. It has to be ambitious though in today's day and age, because we are all fighting for talent, and talent is expecting more and more of organisations. I was talking to someone the other day who said, we get interviewed now. It's the other way around. So when they speak to a candidate, it's like the company's being interviewed rather than the other way around. So you have to be really hot on what you can offer, but really making it compelling enough and real enough. Going back to Bob's point earlier around some of those real challenges that people have at a human level. How can we make sure that when you come to work and put in time and energy for us, we are going to give you these things to help you, support you, enable you to live your life to the full. So those are the things I think are really important, and why there's a really big impact that payroll can have on thinking about what that overarching employee value proposition is.
Yeah, absolutely right. We know that losing talent is incredibly expensive, not just in terms of financial cost, but the time we've committed to that employee, the time we commit to the onboarding, the training, the development, for that talent to walk out the door because we can't retain them because of a more attractive proposition elsewhere. That's harming, that's troublesome. But it's also, and I know because I have a commercial enterprise based on this, it can be expensive to find top talent. I thought it was interesting, Bob said earlier, there's a war on talent. We hear it a lot. I'm a big believer. I know that's a bit of a cliche, but when we hear a cliche, we should listen to it. They're there for a reason. There is a real war for talent at the moment. If we get this right, it can add huge ROI to your business. So, Bob, I know that's something that you've looked into, the return on investment for companies offering long-term benefits and investing in advanced payroll systems. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, it's definitely. I mean, if I just use an example, and I'm sure people that are listening into this webinar now and in the future will be relevant. When we go into meetings now with HR and payroll and finance, we spend loads of time talking about HR, the onboarding experience, and making sure they've got the right desk and the contracts of employment are correct, etc. The one thing that will tell people to leave is if their pay's wrong, right? With all respect to having the nice desk, having a nice office, if you get their pay wrong and they're just not getting paid correctly, they'll walk, right? And we've got to remember, what are the biggest triggers of people leaving? Yes, there's talk about, I don't like my the managers that I work for, but pay or not getting paid correctly is probably up there in the top 1 or 2 items. So if we don't take the time to think about that now and saying, well, how do we get an equal voice, not just about onboarding people and the employee experience during their time, but making sure that they're getting paid correctly. I see payroll sitting at the same leadership meetings of HR and finance at the same time, because without them, you're not going to make this work, right? And it's only when we get that right are we going to see that then the successful organizations are getting it right. Are we going to see that they actually don't have this war for talent? In fact, they're attracting the right people because they're looking at the full life cycle, not just the time that they're looked at from a HR perspective. So, I just urge finance people and HR people to say, don't ignore those payroll people, because they have got a wealth of information, wealth of knowledge, and actually what they can bring to the table is just something that might be missing today around those conversations. So
yeah,
the forward-thinking companies are taking and leveraging that.
I agree. I think from my perspective as a recruiter in this space, so we know what attracts talent. We have to, because we have to sell EVPs to different clients across different sectors, all verticals, at all different levels. And I think it comes down to 3 key things, right? The first is obviously having competitive compensation and benefits, not just salary, compensation and benefits, the full remuneration. We know that payroll, though, strategically can play a really important role in making an organization more attractive to potential employees, which links to Kat's point about EVPs. But it goes a little bit further than that, because we want an EVP to show that they are a fair business, they're a transparent business, that, as you say, Bob, they will get paid timely, it will be accurate, and that will help not retain top talent, but also help you pull it in as well. But if we link that then to transparency and trust, which is ultimately a big impact of the Great Awakening or the Great Resignation, when we look at it, was because their employees felt there wasn't enough transparency and they could go elsewhere, and they voted with their feet. As Kat said, they now interview the businesses rather than the other way around. They want to make sure it's the right fit for them. They want to make sure that their values and mission statements align with their own. And we know that if companies can offer transparency in their payroll process, that will help build trust with their employees. And we know that if the EVP reflects that with a really clear, transparent, consistent proposition that involves an error-free payroll process, then that's really going to help keep and attract talent. I think the last bit we've talked about on today's show is that flexibility and personalization piece. We know that payroll can offer flexibility and payment options if the personas require it. There is ability and systems and things out there that can offer that. And there are different pay schedules, on-demand pay, and whatever the diverse needs are, there are solutions that can fit, and that can give you ROI that Bob just mentioned there, because you can retain and again attract top talent. And again, that flexibility should be shown in your EVPs. They're the difference in the world that I work in, that if I've got 2 offers from 2 different companies, one offers a competitive EVP that offers all that flexibility, transparency, and competitive compensation, versus one that doesn't, I know where that employee is going to go. And that's the reality of the situation. So it's really, really important we get that bit right. And I think that's really important for payroll, because this heightens the strategic element of it. A robust payroll system that reinforces that EVP, that really drives a commitment to fair compensation, transparency, trust, flexibility, all those things. They have such an important role to play in attracting and retaining talent. That's certainly the view that I see as a recruiter in this space. So for those that don't have an EVP, and some companies don't, and I'm sure Kat will know more about that, there's still time to create one. I recommend that you do, and you involve payroll, you involve HR, and you involve finance in that process. Kat, last question before we kind of conclude. When it comes to EVPs, are you still coming across many organizations that aren't even aware of what an EVP is? You help create them, or is it a little bit more open now? And for those that you do have, how often is payroll involved?
I think that I think a lot of organizations think they have an EVP, but they get it a bit confused sometimes with employer branding, and sometimes they get it a bit confused with their corporate sort of messaging and sort of purpose and things, and sometimes the EVP, quite frankly, could be written for any organization, so it's not actually compelling, and it doesn't really sing to what they offer and what's unique about their business. So we are finding quite a lot of work. We're doing quite a lot of work with organisations at the moment to help bring to life what their EVP is, and then think about off the back of that the experience that you're actually delivering to achieve that. And I'll be honest, I think I have never had payroll involved in that process. So it's definitely not the right approach for sure. And I think that it's really important to think more holistically. One of our campaigns at the moment is around holistic employee experience, and the belief that actually the whole business owns employee experience, not just HR or payroll or finance or any individual function, but actually the business owns it. So it's a real sort of call out to make sure that all of those different teams, payroll, HR, internal comms, all those kind of teams come together to really think about how you articulate a compelling EVP for the benefit of your business.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. I would argue there's, as an unashamed plug here, you've almost got the Avengers that could deliver this for you. You've got Kat that can do the EVP, Bob can do the transformation, I can find the talent, SD Worx can provide the solution. There we are. We've got all the people you need to deliver everything that you need that we discussed today. Well, look, just to summarise, and thank you everyone for joining us on today's webinar. We've talked hopefully about how we can help transform payroll into a strategic powerhouse, the importance of onboarding and reshaping the employee interaction piece, the impact that real-time wages can have, the importance of flexible pay propositions, but most importantly, how that all ties into an overall employee experience proposition, because it really does impact EVPs, which of course impacts the ability to attract, the ability to look after, and the ability to retain your talent, which is absolutely important. And that's really where we can unlock, I believe, payroll data to reinforce those EVPs and to understand where we can really, I guess, leverage the strategic importance of payroll to really unlock ROI for organizational objectives. So hopefully everyone's gained a lot from the session. I want to say a huge thank you to Bob Rahill for joining us today, and a huge thank you to Kat Bernardes for joining us as well. And this is the last part. This will be available on the Payroll podcast in due course if you have missed it today. But please do stay tuned. Please do keep an eye on the SD Worx website for new webinars coming through, and have a look on your screens and you'll see a QR code where you can download the white paper, which gives you a whole host of information, stats and summary reports and survey reports on the people revolution and how payroll is really changing the world of work. So do download that when you can. And just a huge thank you and a very, very festive period to you all. I'm sure I'll join you on a webinar again in the new year. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Bob.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Kat.